That was Sherlock Holmes. It is considered one of the greatest movies of the 1920s. But there's a distinct sound to the movie. Nothing. There is no talking, as with movies of those times. And the American film industry was searching for something more. So, how did we get from this to this? Well, it was all part of a major shift with the entertainment in the 1920s. Films and motion pictures became a thing in 1890, with the first ever film, The Great Train Robbery, a 13-minute Western film. These short movies were featured in small 5-cent theaters called Nickelodeons. Movies were also a way to have discussions about politics and social issues, such as D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation, which glorified the KKK of the South, whilst defaming and antagonizing black people. This movie caused major outrage, with protests lining the street for it, but it was the first ever movie to be used as a way to talk about social issues. Movies like these were terrible, but they paved the way for movies like The Great Dictator in 1940, in which Charlie Chaplin dresses up as Adolf Hitler and gives a speech denouncing the Nazis and the Third Reich, which was especially impactful because Hitler was a large fan of Charlie Chaplin's work. As the popularities of movies grew, Hollywood in Southern California became the jewel of the movie industry. But the motion picture was really propelled during World War I, where movies were used as an engine for anti-German propaganda. But in 1927, a new era was launched, with the release of The Jazz Singer, a story about a son defying his father's wishes and becoming a jazz and ragtime singer, the first ever movie with sound to accompany the film on the reel. These types of films were deemed talkies, because they were able to have audible dialogue, instead of black screens with text, like the one shown here, along with an accompanying live orchestra for music and sound effects. Along with the introduction of talkies was color movies, which were beginning to look very nice around the same time. Movie stars began to be extremely large at the time, with some even making salaries more than the president at the time, around $100,000. But, as with every bold innovation throughout history, there were critics who were not happy with this new form of storytelling, deeming it unprofessional. But despite the criticism, it is undeniable that movies were a new form of unity for the American public. Another form of entertainment that rose to prominence in the 1920s was the radio. Invented by the Italian Guglielmo Marconi in the 1890s, it was used for long-range communication during World War I. Later, though, in the 1920s, smaller radios for at-home use were invented, with one of the first news radio broadcasts being the radio station KDKA in Pittsburgh, broadcasting the news of the Harding landslide. Early radio shows only reached local audiences, but eventually the technology improved, so national programs were created, and demand for advertising on these shows were tremendous. Radios were a way for families to listen and enjoy to each other's company, with many families of the time sitting around to listen to the radio. Millions of people would tune into certain radio comedy shows, like Amos and Andy, whilst others tuned in to hear the local news. The cultural impact of radios was enormous, with things such as sports being able to have live broadcasts of the game announcers, politicians having to adjust their speeches for the new technology, and the music of so many new artists was able to be enjoyed much more often. While the film and radio industries made major advancements, literature in the 1920s didn't face the same wave of transformation. But that isn't to say there weren't many classics written in this era. F. Scott Fitzgerald, a Minnesota native, published one of the most famous books today, The Great Gatsby, in 1925. This was joined by books like The Sun Also Rises, a story about British and U.S. citizens who traveled to Spain to watch the running of the bulls, by Ernest Hemingway, and All Quiet on the Western Front, a story describing the life of being a German soldier during World War I, by Erich Maria Remarque, although this was later made into a popular movie adaptation. Despite innovation in entertainment coming from radio, movies, and literature, the colossal shift in music was truly the defining change of the 1920s. The 1920s was highlighted by the new age of jazz. Louis Armstrong was a pioneer of this style of music, being the first great jazz soloist. Armstrong was not one to fit into the mold of what people thought music should be. He made improvisation famous and developed a style of singing called scat singing, where you sing nonsense words to music.
Hello, Dolly. This is Louis, Dolly. Mighty glad to have you back where you belong. You lookin' swell, Dolly. I can tell, Dolly. You keep going, still going, you still going strong. Yeah, bro. Never. My old favorite tunes for when they win. Oh, yeah, my. And no rap, but I watch them to get on it down.
Artists like Jelly Roll Morton and Benny Goodman were also famous during this time period as a jazz pianist and a clarinetist. Jazz even found its way into orchestral projects, with legendary composer Aaron Copland infusing classical, folk, and jazz sounds. But the influence of music in this era extends far beyond the sound. Jazz was symbolic of a bigger movement, one that allowed minorities and women to break out of societal standards. The New Orleans originated sound brought African American culture into the limelight. Whether it be through the dances, the people, or the sound, the major societal shift brought upon by this new era of music is still seen today. All in all, entertainment of the 1920s had major impacts on life then and life now. It set the groundwork for amazing modern films such as Saving Private Ryan or Star Wars, gave us classic novels such as The Great Gatsby, popularized jazz music, and gave us the invention of the radio. It also allowed everyday people to find entertainment in everyday life. It inspired a new wave of creativity and creators, who not only used their platforms to tell stories, but to inspire change. That is what happened with entertainment in the 1920s, and how it has impacted our lives.